Hi everyone, and welcome back to Questing Beast. Today I'd like to talk about a role-playing game that I've been very interested in for a while, and that is Burning Wheel. Burning Wheel is a role-playing game by Luke Crane. It's been in development for about 15 years or so. So he's been working on it for a long time, and it's received a pretty incredible level of polish for a role-playing game. It's what people might call an indie role-playing game. So it's not as well known as some of the big ones, but it has a lot of very interesting features that a lot of other games don't have that I've seen. So for one thing, it's a role-playing game where the PCs, the player characters, are taken very seriously, much more so than a lot of other role-playing games. They are very much the storytellers. They are the agents of what happens throughout the course of the story. Rather than the GM creating a world and a campaign and the players simply going through with it, they get to decide what happens. They decide where the story goes, because the story revolves around their beliefs, what the characters think about themselves and how they see the world, their personal goals. So when you play Burning Wheel as a character, you are really choosing your own path. You're fighting for what you believe in, and that makes it very interesting. It's very open in a way that a lot of other role-playing games aren't. The Dungeon Master's role is really to challenge their beliefs, to make their lives difficult and to make them interesting, to make them rethink what they believe, to make their beliefs harder to achieve, to make them struggle with the things they believe. That's his goal. His goal is to support the players and to give them an interesting and challenging time in telling their own stories. One interesting rule in Burning Wheel is called Let It Ride. And this is a rule that could be applied to lots of other role-playing games as well, but is particularly interesting and effective in Burning Wheel. And that's when a player decides to do something, when they make a roll, the Game Master simply has to let it ride. In other words, he can't make them re-roll again. So for example, if a character snuck into a bandit camp, the Game Master might say, roll your stealth to see if you succeed. And then when he does, he says, okay, you succeeded, but now you're sneaking past their campfire. Roll your stealth again. He couldn't do that in Burning Wheel. If you passed your stealth test, you've passed. You let it ride, unless the situation changes dramatically, and it would require another roll. Same if you failed. If you failed, you failed. You're not stealthy today. It's not working out for you. That saves a lot of rolling. It saves a lot of just bother of rolling the same things over and over again. And it makes the story move faster and move forward more quickly. Another important principle is called say yes and roll. Say yes or roll, rather. And that's if the consequences of failing a task aren't interesting and don't drive the plot forward, then the player shouldn't roll at all. He should simply do it. The Game Master should just let players do things if failing to do those things aren't interesting. So we only roll when failure affects the plot and drives an interesting moment. That's a very interesting rule, one that can be applied to lots of other role-playing games as well. One fascinating thing about the Burning Wheel is that there are no classes. You don't start out as a monk, as a fighter, as a rogue, or anything like that. You create your characters using something called life paths. So you actually grow your characters from the moment they're born all the way up until the moment when the game starts. You choose the paths they take in life, the careers, the friends they've made, the enemies they've made, the reputations they've gained. All of those things are grown as the character grows up. You decide all these paths that they take, and by the time you've started the game, your characters are rich, full-bodied, like living, breathing person with a past, with all sorts of interesting traits, some not good, but he's a real person, he's a real character. A lot of people, I've heard some people say that they don't like the character creation system in Burning Wheel because it does take a long time, it's involved, but I love it. It's something that I think really speaks to me. You really get to know a character, really to put time and effort into seeing how he got the way that he got there. It's like writing a great novel. You spend time and care with your characters. You make them fully fleshed. And that's what Burning Wheel does to every PC that you make. That's a remarkable thing. It's something that I think is a great strength of Burning Wheel. Another interesting thing is that whenever you create a character, they come with beliefs. You have to create 3 beliefs at least. Usually one of those is a goal, a personal goal, something that they want to achieve, usually in the near term, 1 or 2 sessions. Another one is a belief they have about another member of the party, whether they like him, hate him, want to hinder him, want to protect them, etc. Another one is a philosophical belief they have about the world. These are the things that drive the characters. When the characters follow these beliefs, when they role play them, when their characters move towards them and stay in line with them, they are rewarded mechanically by the game in the form of Artha, which is a point system that the Game Master awards for role-playing, for playing your beliefs, for playing your traits, and other things. And that encourages players to stay on track and to live and breathe their character. Another interesting thing is that just as there are no classes in Burning Wheel, there are also no levels. You don't go to level 2, you don't go to level 3. It's much more like Skyrim, for example, in which the skills and abilities increase, which you use. And that's it. If you want to be a warrior, but you never actually fight anyone, your sword skill will never get better. It won't get better at all. If you want to be a trapper, but you never set any traps, you won't get better at it. You only get better at things that you do. And that includes your abilities as well as your skills. So as you play the game over the long term, your character really evolves into the kind of person that you've been acting like. Not the kind of person that you hypothetically wish you were, but the person that you're acting like is what you become. And that's very interesting. It's another testament to the way that Burning Wheel treats characters very seriously. It treats their development seriously. It's grittier and more character-driven than most other RPGs. And a lot of other RPGs, you go up to the next level, and all your stats go up, your basic attacks go up, all sorts of things like that. And that's not true in Burning Wheel. It's much more realistic. And that can be a drag for some people, but I think it's fantastic. I think it really encourages you to roleplay because you'll only be what you do. That's something I like a lot. One other interesting thing is that players need to act against their NPC's best interests sometimes in order to succeed. Unlike in a lot of other RPGs, where you're very much encouraged to min-max, to make your character as overpowered as possible, or the game kind of mechanically rewards that, right? A lot of people look down on that you shouldn't be a munchkin, but at the same time, the game rewards you if you do that. You'll just do more damage, you'll kill more monsters, etc. That's something that doesn't work as well in Burning Wheel. You have to act against your character's interests sometimes. And one of those examples is leveling up your skills. In order to increase your skills, not only do you have to use them, but usually you have to use them on tasks that are at or above your skill level. In other words, things that are very difficult to accomplish. So you have to put your character in situations where they're going to be challenged beyond their capabilities. They're going to have to fail. They're going to have to be hurt in order to get better. So you're encouraged not to just wander into the areas of the world where you have an easy time. You're encouraged mechanically, if you want your character to grow, to push them. And the players are pushing themselves rather than the Game Master pushing the players. That's an unusual twist as well. The Game Master, some of the pressure is taken off him. His goal is much more focused on how can I take these beliefs and challenge them, and much less on throwing higher and higher level enemies at the players. The players often seek those out because that's what they want in order to succeed. Same thing with your traits and your beliefs. When you play against your beliefs, or when you use a trait, for example, if you have like a drunkenness trait, and you become drunk and it causes a problem for your party, you get mechanically rewarded for that. The game will give you free rerolls for role-playing your character to the detriment, quote unquote, of how people normally play their characters. In other words, it gets you into playing the person themselves, instead of just using them as a vehicle to do more damage. The game ends up feeling much more like a good novel or a movie than a lot of typical role-playing game, because the characters are forced to have flaws and they're forced to act against themselves. That's the basics of the rules. The basic way you resolve tests is you just roll 6-sided dice, and if it's a 4, 5, or 6, then it's a success. If it's a 1, 2, or 3, then it's a failure. You roll more dice the higher your skills are, and if it meets a certain threshold, then you pass. And you do whatever it was you set out to do. The game is very open in the sense that the game master will tell you the consequences for failure before you roll. You're very rarely in the dark as to what is going to happen if you succeed or if you fail. This means that you make very interesting decisions at all sorts of different points. You're not blundering around, you're making decisions for your character and guiding them along an interesting pathway. The game system in general is very open. All the players are expected to have read and hopefully to own a copy. It's not a game that keeps things from players. It's a system for telling interesting stories via player characters. And that's another difference between the typical role-playing games. The basic game can be played just with the first 70 pages or so, the core system. For resolving tests. Can be used for pretty much an entire campaign if you want. You can resolve combat that way by simply making enemies a certain level of difficulty. And you roll your weapon skill above that and you've won. Or you've tied them up, or you've captured them, or you've killed them, depending on what you said you wanted to do. It's entirely possible and satisfying to play that way. There are a couple modules in the back for fighting, for Duel of Wits. These modules are optional, but they add a lot of complexity to the system that some people like, some people don't, but they're optional. You can take them in or out depending if you like them or if you find them too complicated or not. They are very interestingly designed, however. They both work on a system of both combatants in a fight, for example, write down 3 moves that they want to do, 3 volleys. So I'm going to attack, I'm going to block, I'm going to counter-strike, or I'm going to attack, 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 or I'm going to attack, counter-strike, and then flee, whatever. Both players do this, and then they reveal these 3 volleys simultaneously, and then you match them up against each other. And they conflict in interesting ways. You roll some dice to see who wins, and then the results are computed. This makes the game much more brutal, much more surprising, and much more chaotic than a lot of other role-playing game combats, which are often very methodical on grids. You kind of know it's more like chess. You know what's going to happen. You just roll your dice, and in this case, a lot of times you don't know what your opponent's doing while you're doing it. This sounds crazy to some people, but the effect in game is one of just brutal, surprising chaos. Which is much more realistic and much more dangerous. It mirrors the real world in that sense. At the same time, it allows players that are low power to have low weapon skills. If they're smart and they're clever and they're able to predict what a much higher level enemy will do, can overcome them. If you suspect that your enemy's just going to try and bludgeon you the whole time, even if you're low powered, you can take certain special moves to negate those things, or just counter-strike and take advantage of their overconfidence. So it puts a little bit more strategy and a lot more mental, conniving, insight into the game. You really have to get inside your opponent's mind, and you really have to outthink him, as opposed to just outplay him. And it ends up being much more cinematic as well. Something else about Fight is that combat is much more dire and brutal. When you are stabbed, it's bad. The game treats injury much more realistically than most other role-playing games. If you take a sword swipe to your arm, you can lose your arm. You can lose it. If you take a mortal wound, so you're virtually dead, if you don't die right off the bat, it can take you 6 months of in-game time to recover. Of course, Game Master can fast forward time and skip ahead, but the game takes damage to the characters very seriously. Oftentimes combat is very quick, which again is more realistic. If you actually got into a combat with someone and you were holding long, heavy bladed weapons, as soon as someone got a good hit on someone else, they'd be down. They'd just be gushing blood and screaming in pain. And the game really takes it into account. So you don't get into a fight just because, oh look, there's an enemy, there's a kobold, there's a basic orc, attack! The game doesn't reward that. Unless you get very lucky, a lot of times those things are going to really come back and hurt you. So you have to think ahead and only get into combat when it matters, when it fulfills your beliefs, when it's dramatic. And that makes the game much less of just a damage fest and much more of a role-playing game. There's another system called Duel of Wits that's also modular. That's virtually the same as the fight rules. You script out things and you play them against each other, but it's for resolving social conflict. So you can have debates, you can have diplomatic situations played out the same way, which is very interesting. I like that a lot. So all in all, Burning Wheel is it's a realistic, it's a dramatic, it's also pretty crunchy. It has some detailed rules in there if you add in the modular systems. It's very much a game, but it's one that lets players tell stories. It lets you make characters that feel real, that feel like they live and breathe, and live in a world where they can make their own decisions and not simply follow along predetermined paths. All in all, I find it a fascinating game, and I might make some more videos of it later. In fact, I may run a game at a later time and an actual play so that you can see what it would be like. But yeah, I recommend it. I recommend you check it out at least and see what you think of it. Tell me if it sounds interesting to you, and what appeals, what doesn't appeal to you about a system like this. In any case, thanks for watching. I hope you enjoyed it. If you liked, please like and subscribe to the video, to my channel, and I'll see you guys later.